Before we get to the video clips, let's outline Steve Pinker's and Noam Chomsky's perspective on violence. Pinker argues that violence has significantly declined throughout history. He emphasizes data and statistics to show a decrease in warfare, homicide rates, and other violent acts. This decline, he suggests, is due to factors like reason, empathy, and the rise of strong states and liberal democracies. Noam Chomsky acknowledges some decrease in violence but argues it's a more nuanced picture. He emphasizes the role of powerful states, particularly the US, in perpetuating violence through wars and interventions. He also questions how violence is defined, arguing that state violence and economic disparity should be considered alongside physical violence. Now off to these wonderful clips of Noam Chomsky.
It reminded me of Steven Pinker's sort of new book on the Enlightenment and how, the triumph of Enlightenment reason and capitalism. And there again you have someone who is one of the more prominent intellectuals in the world and whose words are taken quite seriously. And he's in psychology, which is a sort of a field
he did serious work in experimental psychology, psycholinguistics, experimental psychology. An intelligent person, actually, he's a friend, but I frankly don't think much of these recent books. Nobody could talk about them.
Well, does that mean that, I know you're critical of a lot of sort of obscurantist critical theory, but that's also you're also sort of equally critical of the social sciences, which are not
a lot of not entirely. There's serious work in the social sciences. So take his topic. How everything's wonderful, we're progressing, and so on. Actually, there is serious work on that topic. So take Robert Gordon's book. I forgot the exact title, but something like the Rise and Fall of the American Economy, something like that. Very serious book by a fine economic historian who partially overlaps with what Pinker says, but it's done seriously. What he points out is that he says there was a special century, roughly 1870 to 1970, at which point there was very substantial progress made, and it showed up in health statistics, longevity, quality of life, and so on. Things like invention of indoor plumbing, which probably had a bigger impact on quality of life than all of medicine, and many other discoveries. He says prior to 1870, it was kind of flat. There wasn't much in the way of growth. But at that period, there was huge growth. And then starting in 1970, it started to decline. Well, that's the neoliberal period. That's why you see mortality increasing in the United States. You don't walk around the streets and see people starving to death. But the majority of the population have stagnated. Real mill wages are lower than they were in the 60s. Is that progress?
Well,
and also, what does progress mean?
Yeah.
So if you have an iPhone...
Right, I was going to say, what about our phenomenal smartphones?
Well, what he points, first of all, if we look at the technology that people have, it doesn't come from what Steven Pinker is talking about. It's not modern capitalism. Almost all of this came out of public funding through the state system, then handed over to private power. But these, as Gordon points out, these are frills. iPhones, as compared with indoor plumbing or electricity, is almost invisible. It's frills around the periphery, which have a dubious effect on your actual life.
One of your former colleagues, Steve Pinker, has written a book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, that in fact, if you wanted to choose a time to be around and have a happy, nonviolent life, today is a lot better than when you're being around at Neanderthal times.
Well, that's what he claims, but the weight of evidence is strongly against it.
You think so?
I think so. There's very good work by a serious anthropologist. Brian Ferguson is one who's worked through his data and I think shown that it's probably wrong for about 95% of human existence, namely the hunter-gatherer periods. It's really with the emergence of state systems, the development of complex agriculture, that you begin to get wars that are very destructive. I mean, there's killing among hunter-gatherers, but it's pretty limited.
But there has been moral progress. In fact, you wrote.
Well, one thing that he says is correct. I think that's about it. Since the Enlightenment, there has been moral progress. In our own lifetimes, there's been moral progress. So consider, for example, the status of women's rights today and in 1950. Very different. The status of civil rights, very different. The gay rights, very different. That's progress. And it's been going on slowly since the Enlightenment. But that's a pretty brief period of human history. And in fact, right at this same time have been the most murderous, destructive wars ever. And even 70 years ago, the creation by some of the smartest people in the world of a device that may destroy us all and is on the verge of destroying us all.
We'll get to that. As you know, I'm the chairman of the board of the Atomic Scientists. It's an issue that's really of great interest to me. You actually just reproduced a quote I was going to talk about for you. Is it that there has been moral progress in many ways, status of women in particular. You talk about your daughters versus your grandmother. And you say it's fairly brief, but don't you think it's interesting that coincides with the rise of science? Do you think that's coincidental?
No, it's not coincidental. Part of the contribution of the Enlightenment was to free inquiry from constraints, which led to the rise of science. So breaking free of these fetters that society had imposed did permit the rise of science, did permit moral progress, also permitted massive destruction.
The key points of contention are that Chomsky criticizes Pinker's selective use of data and argues for a broader definition of violence. Also, Pinker sees strong states as promoters of peace, while Chomsky views them as potential sources of violence. Overall, their disagreement reflects contrasting approaches. Where Pinker has focused on long-term trends and the optimistic potential of human progress, Chomsky has emphasized the ongoing realities of power, inequality, and state-sanctioned violence. Well, I hope you liked the video and subscribe to the channel. If you wish, you can join the channel as a member, it would be greatly appreciated. Also, if you would check out and subscribe to my other channel, Progressive Movement, the link is on the homepage and in comment section. Now, take care and bye-bye.